for your mind, your body, and your soul. It's right there in the Word. The Word of God will set you free. It's right there in the Word. Eternalizing is the key. It's right there in the Word. It's right there in the Word. It's right there in the Word. It's right there in the Word.
Good afternoon. Today's installment of There's a Word for That is really personal for me. I've grown weary of death. Having buried one of my dearest and oldest friends in December, and now my pastor and brother beloved just this past weekend, not to mention all the other deaths I have served as part of. My soul is really weary of death. Maybe yours is too. So I have invited the Reverend Dr. Jamie Edie Chisholm to present today. She's a public theologian, a loss navigation specialist, a death doula, death educator, chaplain, author, and poet. A person who for more than 2 decades has served as spiritual care practitioner who journeys with congregations and with clergy and with individuals and communities. I've asked her to come so that she can help us navigate the many losses we have experienced and help us to find healing for the grief that we carry. So won't you help me welcome her to this special edition of There's a Word for That, the weekly word presentation as part of the Hymns with Phil Carter Fellowship. I'm Pastor Cynthia Turner-Wood, and I am delighted and pleased to present to you the Reverend Dr. Jamie Edie Chisholm. Hear ye her.
Good evening, everyone. I am Reverend Dr. Jamie Edie Chisholm, and I'm glad to join you for There's a Word for That. There's a word for that. And our word today is simply relief. I know I can use some relief. And relief, by simple definition, really just means the alleviation or the removal of pain. And I don't know about you, but I have been carrying some painful things these past 2 years. If we go back, it was around this time 2 years ago that we entered into our pandemic. It was around this time 2 years ago that school doors closed, that the doors of sanctuaries and other spaces where faith communities meet regularly closed. Offices closed, restaurants closed. It was this time 2 years ago that we had to disconnect from people that we love because we were afraid of what might happen. This time 2 years ago, where in the hospital, people could not come in with their loved ones when they were sick. It was heavy. And I know that I needed relief. I needed relief, and perhaps you do as well. And maybe you're saying pain. I'm not experiencing any significant pain right now, but perhaps you need relief from grief. Grief. We often think of grief as something related to death. We grieve because someone has died. But the truth is that grief is this internal experience of our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions that occur with death and non-death related losses. And so some of us are carrying heaviness because our loved ones have died in the past few years, and not just from COVID, but death in general. We have had loved ones who have died, and we are experiencing grief, and we might need some relief. But here's a step further. Some of us have had some things die, and we never really thought of it as grieving. But if you think about grief as our response to death and non-death related loss, it's easy to see how, and I'll name a few things, not just the death of a loved one, but perhaps a separation or a divorce. Perhaps the loss of a home or other possessions. Perhaps the loss of status. You no longer have a job. Perhaps the loss of mobility or health or sight or hearing, or even further. How many of you entered into 2020 with dreams? Maybe you called them New Year's resolutions. Maybe you wrote things out on your vision board, but you had this vision. And by March, it seemed to fall by the wayside. It's a loss. And so maybe it's not that you need relief from grief that you're carrying because people you know and love have died, but perhaps you need relief from the grief that you are carrying that's associated with all of the non-death related losses that we have experienced over the past few years. Think about it. We had to remove our children from schools and their friends. Y'all know children grieve too. We removed our children from school. Imagine the third grader who can no longer have playtime and run around the schoolyard and jump rope or play ball or draw or whatever it is that they enjoy doing with their classmates. And we snatched them out of schools because we had to, but that's a loss and it brings grief. And so 2 years later, here we are, still experiencing losses. There are people who still lost their homes, people who still lost jobs and haven't received jobs that pay as well. People who still, when they lost jobs, lost a sense of security and safety. People, when they lost their jobs, lost a sense of identity. Who am I if I can't be or do what I used to do? People who had a loss of faith because what is happening in this world? It's too much to bear. All of this happening at once. What I have learned is that life hits us with a steady stream of losses, and we often need to find relief. But here's one of the challenges. We are encouraged not to pause for relief. We're encouraged to keep it moving. And I understand many of the reasons why. For some, we say people are depending on us. For others, it's how will it work if I'm unable to do it? For yet others, it's, well, I haven't shown anybody how to do this yet, so I have to show up. And somebody else is saying, I don't know how to do anything else but show up. We very rarely spend time pausing. Even the pandemic, many did not pause during the pandemic. In fact, some people worked even harder. And I am not against hard work. Not at all. But I want to encourage us to pause for a moment to find relief. Now, I often introduce myself as Reverend Dr. Jamie Edie Chisholm, the daughter of, and I say my mother's name, my mother is still living, but I also say the granddaughter of Alberta Brown and the cousin of Pauline Bennett. Now, Alberta and Pauline, my grandmother and my cousin, died over 30 years ago. So they are no longer with us. But it is in my naming them that I hold on to their memory. So it is something that I have become accustomed to doing as part of honoring two women who changed my life forever, who made me, contributed to making me who I am today. And I say that because I wonder how many of us watching, listening, have ever paused in these past 2 years, at least, long enough to name the people who are meaningful for us, meaningful to us, people who changed our lives, people who impacted us in ways that we can't even name. How many times have we paused to name them? You know, in finding relief in our grief, in the heaviness that we're carrying, which seems to be unending because we're still in a pandemic. And even though mass restrictions and other restrictions are lifted, people are still dying, and it's still scary for some. And we still need to find relief even 2 years later. I wonder how many of us have paused long enough to take care of ourselves, to get the relief that we need so that we can continue to show up in the world and do all of the wonderful things that we do. And I know pausing might seem difficult, but here are some of the things that I have learned that have helped me in my pausing and have helped me find relief in my grief. And I hope you find these things helpful as well, because it's heavy. I can't see your faces. I really wish I could, but it's heavy. Someone is still holding on to the fact that they couldn't be present when their mother died. Someone is still holding on to the fact that they lost their job, and as a result, they lost their home. And someone is still holding on to the fact that they are now separated or divorced, or a friendship didn't work the way they thought it would. Someone is still holding on to losses, not just death-related losses, but these other losses that keep adding up. It gets heavy. Aren't you ready for some relief? Aren't you ready for some relief? Here are a few things that I have found helpful in my processing of grief, whether it is a death-related or non-death-related loss. Here are some of the things that I have found helpful in finding relief. First thing is this: I spend time doing what I call naming my loss. And I know, right? Just naming the loss sounds really simple. But how many of us have spent a little bit of time actually acknowledging the losses that we've experienced in the past couple of years? Often we're told to disregard, to keep it moving, all of the things that encourage us to sort of disassociate from anything that would make us feel, so that we can continue to produce, so that we can continue to do. But maybe it's time for us to pause for a moment to just name. I'll start. Lamont Richardson. Lamont Richardson is my cousin. Lamont is 6 months older than me. I think he's about 6 months older than me. He was one of my first friends. He died in December of 2020. What about you? Is there someone that you need to name, that you need to acknowledge? I'll give you time. I know I can't see you. Naming Lamont keeps me connected in ways that are helpful in my processing of grief. Naming your loss gives you an opportunity to acknowledge the people and the things that are meaningful to you and the ways that they touched your life. So name it. Name your aunt, name your mother, name the bishop, name the person that you lost, name them. And then name the dream that feels like it died, and name the job that you no longer have, and name the relationship that ended. Name it. And here's the thing. Here's the second thing. The first thing is naming it. The second thing, don't worry about if you start crying, or if you get angry, or if you feel like you're disappointed. Don't worry about if it brings about frustration. Don't worry about that. You know why? Those are your human emotions. And it's okay for you to connect with your humanity. So if you are sad, be sad. If you are angry, be angry. If you are disappointed, be disappointed. Even now, I'm thinking about all of the losses that I've witnessed in the past 2 years, and I am feeling heavy. I'm going to share a story. When I served as a chaplain in a level 1 trauma center in Philadelphia, in the beginning of the pandemic, when the doors were closed and no one could come in to visit their loved one, even when they were about to take their last breaths. I used to go into rooms with a mask, a shield, My hair would be wrapped up in a cap. I had on a gown. I had on booties on my shoes. And I wore clothes that I would take off on my porch before I entered the house. At the hospital, I would have to use my phone to call family, to show them their loved one because they couldn't be present. And that gets heavy. And I too need relief. I can't call the names, but I'll call the circumstances. I need relief from standing at bedsides where family couldn't be present. And the only voice that the person could hear was mine. I need relief. And so I know this isn't the happiest word, relief, but I think if we pause for a moment today to acknowledge our losses, remember the first thing, naming the loss. If we pause for a moment today to acknowledge the loss, and if we do the second thing, which is connect to the feeling, give yourself permission to feel. You are human. Don't believe that your tears make you weak. In fact, I believe it is in your ability to allow yourself to feel all of what comes naturally to you is a strength. You want to find some relief? Spend some time reflecting on naming the people and the things that are dear to you that you no longer have, that are no longer with you physically. Spend some time reconnecting to your feelings, acknowledging how you feel. God and the universe are big enough to hold your emotion. And then find community. You know, grief is personal. It's also collective. It's this individual and communal thing. There's community for you. You don't have to grieve alone. You can find relief in community. And I know before we used to get together and we could hug and we could touch one another. And then in some ways, the pandemic shifted that. We were unable to gather and to love and to show each other affection and to hold each other in our sorrow. In some ways, we can still do that. We can do that again. If you're able to find community, people who will allow you to enter in and name your loss, people who will allow you to enter in and be sad or disappointed or whatever emotion comes up for you, people who will hold your feelings and your presence as sacred as you grieve, is a way for us to find relief. If you are one who is grieving, I encourage you to name it. Don't be ashamed. Name it or name them. Feel it. Don't be ashamed. Feel it. And then share it. Share with community so that you can find relief. And for those who will embrace anyone who is entering in with heaviness, anyone who is entering in with grief that they've not been able to process, here is my encouragement to you. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to silver lining it. Don't try to at least them. Just sit with them in their sadness and in their sorrow. Just be present and listen. Even if that means you were listening to silence, we can find relief, y'all. I know it gets heavy, but we can find relief. We can find it for ourselves, and we can find it with each other. Thank you. The word for today and our tomorrows is relief. God bless you.
Hey, listen, I want to thank you so much for tuning in to today's message. I know that you were blessed. This is Pastor Cynthia Turner Wood, and I'll see you next week for another installment. Until then, know that whatever the issue is, there is a word for that. For the grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God lasts forever. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time. God bless you.